Hey developers, today we are going to look at TypeScript support inside Vue.js. So we're going to take a look at a couple of different ways we can do that. We're going to look at the official documentation, and then I'm going to walk you through a few examples of how to get it started. And then we're going to look at how you actually implement it inside your Vue.js apps. So make sure you stay all the way to the end and learn all about it. Hey, and if you don't know, my name is Eric. I'm a big fan of Vue.js, and this channel is all about web development, programming, frameworks. If you guys like that type of stuff, make sure you click on that subscribe button and click that like button for the algorithm. I would really appreciate that. So before we get too far into this video, I want to say thank you guys. If you didn't check out my last video, I released a video on the top 150 YouTube channels. So in fact, right now, as of this recording, the repo that I created just in a couple days has over 437 stars. It's been forked like almost 64 times. And just tons of people have been throwing pull requests up. I've probably merged like 30 of them so far. And I've had probably another 50 channels, maybe even more, maybe closer, probably 50 to 60 channels. And you can see here now we have non-English channels. So if you don't know, this is a GitHub repository that lists YouTube channels. I just want to have one place online where people can post their YouTube channels. If people are looking for different types of YouTube channels for developers, they can come here and find it. So now we have English channels on tutorials, informational, live coding. We have non-English. We have Russian, Hindi, Turkish, Italian. So we just have tons of information on here. If you haven't checked it out, I'll put a link in the description below. But yeah, thank you for everyone that's contributed. And hopefully we can still grow this to have every single development channel on YouTube. That'd be awesome. Okay, enough of that. So let's go into our app here. And so I have Visual Studio Code open. And if you look at the official TypeScript support documentation, it tells you a little bit that it's obviously fully supported. We don't have to worry about it. And that there's some NPM packages. It has all the types added. And even tells you some recommended configurations, but we're not going to worry about the recommended configurations because we're going to use Vue CLI and start off that way. If you're taking an existing Vue project and you want to add TypeScript to it, that's a little bit of a different process. Maybe in a separate video, I'll show you how to do that. But let's just assume that you're creating a brand new project using the latest version of Vue CLI. And by the way, it's probably best that you use an IDE that has TypeScript support like Visual Studio Code. I think that's probably one of the best ones. And then also there's a Vue extension that you can get if you don't already have it inside Visual Studio Code, which gives you some nice tools to, nice snippets to easily create a TypeScript file. And there's some for WebForm as well, WebStorm. So I have the latest version of Vue CLI, which I believe as of this programming is of this YouTube video is 4.1.2. So if I do Vue create, YouTube TS, it's going to ask me some questions here. So first, I have some preset ones. We don't worry about that. But I'm going to manually select features. And obviously, I want to choose the TypeScript one. So that is the most important one. And then, so now we have this choice if we want to use the class style component syntax or the non-class style component syntax. Now, if you want to use full-on ES6 classes inside your Vue app, then you want to type yes here. If you don't want to use ES6 style classes, then you want to type no here, and then you're going to use a slightly modified default export of Vue. You actually use something called Vue.extend instead of the default export that you usually see in our single file components inside Vue.js. But I'll show you both ways. We're not going to get too deep into each, but I just want to show you what's possible for both. So let's say yes here for the single class style components. And then I always type yes here. It asks you if you want to use Babel alongside TypeScript, which I don't think there's any reason why you not want to. So I always type yes here. That'll make sure if you're using the latest TypeScript features that it obviously transpiles down to the correct JavaScript. And then keep in mind, if you look actually at TSLint's documentation, the creators of TSLint have decided to deprecate that, and they're rolling all the linting into ESLint. So if you're using TypeScript, the correct way to do it is use the latest version of ESLint and not use tslint. So it's, as it says right there, it is being deprecated. Now I'm not sure how far along in the ESLint they're getting with the TypeScript support in there. I think it's pretty good right now. If I stand me if I'm correct, put a comment below if you know any difference. So we're just not going to worry about that. We're going to do it with error prevention only. And then we're going to do lint on save and dedicated config files. And I'm not going to save it. And so this will just take a moment and it'll create our brand new project and we'll jump in and look at it. Okay, great. So went ahead and installed, and we can just make sure it works. We'll just change directory to our YouTube TS and npm run serve and npm run serve. Type that right. And this will go ahead and start it on local port 8080, I believe. While it's doing that, let's take a look at the structure of it. Oh, actually it's done. We can go ahead and open it up. You can see here, this is a Vue.js plus TypeScript app. Pretty simple. This normal welcome page that we always see. Now let's take a look at what it looks like. So first, if we look in the package.json, we can see, kind of look under the hood and see what this gave us to start off with. So we look, see here, obviously we have Vue. Now there's a couple different ones. We have this Vue class component library, which gives us ES26 TypeScript class decorator for Vue components, and this Vue property decorator. So those are the two, and obviously ESLint that we chose earlier, and TypeScript and Vue template compiler. So this is everything we need to start, but these two are the most interesting here. So let's take a look at those first. If we go into our GitHub and take a look at what these are. So the Vue class component is the TypeScript decorator for class Vue component. And what this does is you essentially create your classes as if you're using this kind of class standard here. So you have this @component, which is this decorator called component, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then you have this export default class, app extends Vue. And what this does is now you have essentially like a class. So if you're coming from something like, oh, I don't know, Angular, this kind of feels a little bit familiar. So let's take a look at it, what it did for us. So if we go into our components, our hello world that we normally have everywhere, this is what it looks like. So let's just delete a few things in here. I always hate this, all this stuff. We'll just delete it all. We'll save it. And now you can see here we have the props. So now we have this @component and they have this Vue property decorator. So that's the other thing. So if we look here, here's the Vue property decorator library. And this gives us things like @prop sync, model, watch, provide, inject. So it gives these other decorators that we can annotate our classes with. So it has that prop here, the private message, and doesn't have an export class in here, but we can, oh, here it is right here. Export default class hello world extends Vue. So this is essentially the app right here. So let's save it right now. And if we look at it, okay, we just have the logo at the top. We deleted everything else in the message. But let's say we wanted to add another data property. So instead of having to do something like creating a data object and then returning back an object, we don't do anything like that. Now, since we're using this class syntax, all we need to do is add a property inside this class here. So we'll just say, I don't know, Erik, and we have equal, and this will be hello world. So now we have Erik here. I can just add a second thing in here, Erik, save it. Now I have hello world. So this is essentially the same as something in our data object, since now we just can use a property inside the class. Now you're probably thinking, what about computed properties? Well, the computed properties, if we look back at our documentation, you can just do something like this, get. So we have getters. So this is, if you're familiar with getters and setters, you can do a getter. I don't know, let's see, full name. Let's do this. Let's add one called first name, and we'll have one called last name, and we'll have some called full name, and that'll return. And if we look at here, the syntax, it has to be like a method. And we'll return this dot first name plus this dot last name. We'll come back up here. So we'll put first name, and we'll put last name, and we'll put full name, and see if that works. So we do that. Cool. So hello world, hello world, hello world, hello world. But let me change the name to Erik Hanchet and refresh it. I gotta save it. There we go. Reloads. Cool. So now first name's Erik, last name, and then Erik Hanchet is the full name together. Now, obviously, if I wanted to do this correctly, I probably want to add like a space or template literals, whatever you want. So now this is how we do computed properties inside of here. So what about a method? So methods are just methods. So we can do something like this. Erik, I don't know. We can add a new one, like a counter equals 0. And then if we want to do counter here, we just have a counter. And we'll just do this dot counter. Well, we probably don't want to do increment counter. We don't have the same name as the property. Plus plus. And then, I don't know, we can have an h5 here. And we'll have counter. And let's say we wanted to increment that counter. So we'll have a button that says press me. And we can still use the same syntax we use for our templates with the events here. Like on a click event, we'll do the increment counter. Save it all. Now have a button. And so that gave us an error. Let's see what we did wrong here. If we look at console, oops, it's saying here, the increment counter, I have a typo. So increment, let's try that. Cool, so now the counter is incrementing. So yeah, I mean, that looks all correct to me. So yeah, so that's how you can add methods. Now you're probably thinking, well, you just added TypeScript, but you're not using types at all. Well, we can certainly start using types. So I could have, I know I can do a property here called, add, let's say, zip, and we get to put it type string. And now Visual Studio Code should notice that if we try to assign a number to the zip file, it'll give us an error in here. So if I put increment counter here and I put this.zip equals, I don't know, 1, you can see there's a red line underneath it. If I put my mouse over it, it says type 1 is not assignable type string. So of course, since we have zip here, it's type string, it's not going to work correctly. We could also, if we were returning things, we can add return values to this, like this. Maybe this is supposed to return a string or a number. And now it's giving an error that a function whose declarative type is neither void nor any must return a value, and it's not returning a value here. So obviously that's a problem. Obviously, technically, this is just a method, so I don't really care too much about this. But this first name is returning a string, so I could put in here string, and everything works correctly. But once again, if I put something like number here, it doesn't work. It gives me an error. It still compiles correctly, but it gives me error in the VTOR here. Now you could change your ESLint settings, and do some different rules that if you have errors in your TypeScript that it won't even compile correctly. There's a way of setting that. You can also look at your tsconfig and see how it's set up. I'm not going to get into that today because that's a little bit more advanced, but there's certainly ways you can do that too. You can see it even has shims for TypeScript. So it can get a little bit more complicated. So I'll put this back to a string. It can get a little more complicated if you want to do some other things. So we have this props here, so we can declare everything that's being passed into the hello world component using this @prop. But if you want to do watchers or models, prop sync, then you just use all these different decorators. If you want to do lifecycle hooks, you just type in the name of the lifecycle hook. So like, mounted. You can do like console log mounted with an M. Save it. And I'll leave a link to these descriptions too so you can follow along. And now you can see there's mounted in the console. So this is essentially how you do it. Now, I think the best way, if you're using modern day TypeScript, and I think I could probably do a whole course on this, is what you want to do is add types to everything in your app. And that's really the power of TypeScript. Obviously, as the name implies, if you put types for everything, then you can more easily and quickly find errors. So anytime I would talk to a backend or anytime I have complicated data inside objects, I would make an interface for it. So I could definitely see, like, the proper way of doing a TypeScript app in Vue is I would probably create a couple of extra folders here, maybe an interface folder to put all my interfaces. I would probably add some classes too. So if I want to have a really tight data model that I want to add stuff to and add it into a class, I can do that. So that would make sense. Maybe I had like an alert class, and you can have all the nice things about TypeScript. Then you can extend it. You can use interfaces. You can create abstract classes. You can do all that with the TypeScript ecosystem. So, but I think the basic part of it would be to start off and start adding types to everything. And that's where you're going to catch the errors while you're just typing and creating. And that would be anytime, like it's going to infer this is a type string because I just equal type string. But you know, when I work with TypeScript, I'll have maybe 20 different properties on the top of my class with all the different types defined. And then anytime I'm inside in my methods, I'm constantly using them. So I at first I wasn't a big fan of this class-based, this Vue class component library, but it's kind of grown on me. I haven't talked to anyone that's used this in huge projects. I can imagine this is really useful. And especially if you come from that object-oriented programming background, I think this makes a lot of sense. You do lose out on some of the simplicity of Vue, just using, export default and then using it all that way. This is a little bit more complicated. I haven't deep dived into all the different properties, like the provide reactive, inject reactive. I'm assuming that once you get into more advanced more advanced Vue apps, you might be using these. There's also emit too, so if you need to like emit something to your parent, you just use this add emit, and then inside the component, essentially this is where you put everything. You put your counts and you do your emits and everything like that. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about this one. So let's talk about the other way of using class-based of TypeScript inside your Vue app. So let's start over again. And I'm going to use, right now I'm in the YouTube TS folder. So I'm going to go back down one directory and I'm going to create a new app. And I'm going to close this. And I'm going to do YouTube TS extend. And this will create a new Vue app, which will we're going to create a new one, but this time we're going to say no to the class-based one. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So this will just take a second. Okay, so it's done installing. So like the other app, we'll just change directory to it. We'll run npm run serve. While it's doing that, let's close the folders for this app. And we can kind of take a look at what it is. So I call it YSTS extend. And in my source folder, everything sort of looks the same, but you'll notice if you look at the bottom, you see script lang equals TS. And if you look at the other one, just to remind ourselves what that one looked like, that one also had script lang equals TS, so beware of that. But this one looks a little different because now we have this export default Vue.extend, while in the other one we had that decorator at the top, that component decorator. So this looks really similar to what we normally see with our normal Vue apps, where it's export default, and then we have this object where we put everything inside. So now we have this Vue extend. Our props look like props. Our name looks like name. Our data looks like data. So let's see here. So it should be running. I'm going to open up our app again. So here's the Vue.js. This is the basic app that always comes with. So let's just do like we did before. We'll just delete all this crap. We'll save it. So now we just have the hello world. So now the way this works is we have the data object like we normally do. Close this. Let's see here. Let's do our data object. And we'll return this object. And we'll return a test that says hello from TypeScript. And then, of course, we can put this at the top. And we'll call it Vue.test. So if we put test in here, if we look at it, you can see hello from TS, that works. But let's say we wanted to add a method. So we can add a method. It's methods here. And we'll have a pressMe method. And inside that pressMe, we can actually give it a return type. So we'll return type string. And then if we don't return a string, like return a number, we get an error that says one is not assignable type string. So if we put in a string in here, then it works. So you can do things like that where now you have a little bit of flexibility with TypeScript. You are using the same kind of way, the look and feel that you normally use of Vue.js, but you have the options of adding TypeScript in. There's a few caveats I noticed while using it. If you actually look at the TypeScript support, it tells you the basic usage. You can use this Vue.extend. You can also use if you use constant component, it will not have any type inference. So make sure you always use this Vue.extend. So it's a good idea that right here it mentions that you should probably add a type to the annotation. So like this method, you're saying you're returning a type string. So it gets confused with this dot type. So need annotation due to this and return type. If you have it kind of gets a little bit confused of what type it is. So its best bet is to include it inside the type of the method itself. So one thing I noticed, like if this works right here, and if I do return this dot test plus blah, that will work, of course. If I had a pressMe method, that is. But let's say if this test was a number, let's say I did this dot test and have it equal a number. Well, it gets confused, and I just delete this blah here. So the TypeScript, the annotations in here still gets confused. It like doesn't understand this is a number. So it doesn't give me an error inside the console because it says this dot test has a type any, even though technically the test is a string that we defined here in the data object. So that's one bad thing I noticed. So it definitely with these data types, it wasn't picking up that this should be a string. Yeah, so it seems like it doesn't, from the data object, it isn't inferring the type correctly. So that might be one disadvantage of using the Vue.extend, but you could certainly bring in your own interfaces. You can certainly create your own objects inside each method and do it that way. It looks like you have a little bit less flexibility in the data object. And if you know of any way to get past that, leave a comment below. But it doesn't seem like it's inferring it correctly inside the methods if you do it this way. All right, that's all I guess I have to say today. I would say if you want to use the pure TypeScript, you might want to use the classes. However, if you just want to add in types, I would just use the Vue.extend, and I think that would work fine for smaller projects. I really appreciate you guys watching. Thanks.